It's really a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Yassir Makkawi from American University of Sharjah to our biology seminar series today. Just a quick sort of background on Dr. Yassir. He did his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering at the University of Khartoum in Sudan. Then did his master's at King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals in Saudi Arabia. And from there, he moved to the UK and did his PhD in NYUAD University in Edinburgh. And then moved to Aston University in Birmingham and stayed there as a faculty for a few years. Then in 2015, Dr. Yassir joined the American University of Sharjah. And here he has been interested in basically developing the biomass to energy technology in the UAE using resources that are locally available and relevant, particularly using waste as material that can be used to for conversion to energy. So, and I think today that's that's going to be the main focus of his talk. So let me welcome Dr. Yassir again, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Kourosh, for your introduction, and I'm glad to be with you today. To go on to the subject, I'm going to give you an overview on potentials of waste to energy, as you can see in the main slide here. And this is a research we have recently started developing in UAE, or American University of Sharjah, continuing from my previous research in European Bioenergy Research Institute in UK in Aston University. So I will take you through the work that we have conducted so far in the last 5 years or so. I will also give you an introduction of what is the waste to energy in general, the technology. Also take you through some examples or case studies that we have completed recently on waste to energy generation. First of all, our research is driven by the UAE vision for reducing waste and waste minimization and generation of renewables. So it is actually addressing two issues here in the UAE, particularly waste minimization and renewables. The UAE have set a very ambitious program to divert all waste from landfill, and also to produce renewables. So, for example, the target is to generate 44% of our power from renewables by 2050. The nearest vision for 2021 is to achieve minimization of waste going to landfill, and also to address renewables. There is also ambitious target, for example, in Dubai, for example, to produce 7% of total power from renewables by 2020, this year, which I think they are in good track on that one. And a very ambitious program, 75% by 2050. So these are just giving you an outline on the vision of the UAE, and also the driving force behind our research is to address these issues of waste minimization and renewables. Of course, UAE is a petroleum country, and they're rich in energy, But again, addressing renewables is to diverse energy sources and also to minimize CO2 emissions. So it's not only just to provide energy source, it is also addressing environmental issues and diverting and securing diverse energy sources. So one of the main questions that may come into anyone who is listening to this waste to energy is, what are the waste materials in the UAE? In the West, they are very rich in green waste plantation, forestry waste, agricultural waste, and so on. In regions like the UAE, arid and semi-arid regions, we are in desert environment. And one of the tackling issues that we need to address, the problem that we need to tackle in this is to identify the sources. First, what are the waste, and also what are the other sources of organic waste? Because when we talk about waste to energy, we are talking about organic waste. One of the things we first looked at is agricultural waste. And as we all know, UAE is not an agricultural country, but we have huge amount of date palm waste. It's estimated to be 1 million tons per year. The other organics waste in the UAE is that is coming from the municipal solid waste, household waste, and sewage sludge. The estimated is 2.9 million tons per year, municipal solid waste. Around that one is 2 million tons is from household. Of course, the government here has already developed methods to get rid of the municipal solid waste, like composting, forming compost from the waste, like what we have here in Sharjah, specifically in the Emirate of Sharjah. They have BIA developing compost from municipal solid waste. However, majority of this waste is going to landfill. Only very small fraction that is used for compost. There unfortunately no accurate data on amount of waste in the UAE. Unlike in the West, they have very good record of all kinds of waste, but in the UAE we have limited information. But what we know is that there are resources that can be utilized, or waste that can be utilized in commercial way to produce energy from waste. Other waste we have in the UAE is general agricultural waste like grass and so on. Fishery waste also it's a considerable amount of waste here. In one of the fishery of fish markets here in Sharjah, they produce almost half ton of fishery waste in their market here. So it is a considerable amount of waste to be considered. Animals, of course, we are desert environment. The animal waste is also not large, but there are some farms which are also producing considerable amount of waste. Car tires, sometimes people are looking at car tires for waste, energy generation from waste. And plastic is also a new focus on our waste to energy. People are looking at various options to minimize dumping plastic and utilizing it for energy, or for producing energy, or disposing it in a good and safe environment way. So we mainly have in the UAE here, just to summarize in this slide, is date palm and the municipal solid waste. These are the two main wastes we have here in the UAE that can be utilized for energy. Statistics, we have general understanding of how much municipal solid waste is produced in the UAE. And as you can see in this graph here, interestingly, China and India produce minimum per capita because the waste per person is low. However, in some developed countries like the US, Germany, Finland, it is quite high. The UAE comes in the middle in terms of general waste, municipal solid waste. Okay, that is in terms of tons per capita per year. We are in average rate. However, when we looked at specifically at food waste, because food waste is part of the municipal solid waste. And the UAE, as you can see here, is interestingly coming the highest among the top waste producers in terms of food waste. And when I say food waste here, I'm talking about discarded or leftover or post-consumption, something that we discard after we eat our meal. So the UAE, in terms of production, you can see the red here. This is the production of UAE in food waste. It is quite low, but per person, because of the population, it's quite strikingly high, 0.21. This is the highest among all the countries we have looked at. And actually, this is well documented in the literature that the UAE has high food waste going into landfill, mainly going into landfill. So this is what the waste and statistics we have in the UAE. So the question is, how is the waste to energy is done? What is the process that we need to convert our waste into energy? Here I'm showing you, let's say, a flow diagram or a schematic of how this is done. Imagine you have your waste here, like any organic waste, food, paper waste, residues from agriculture, any organic waste. We can just say biomass. When you heat it up, it produces a gas. And we call this as pyrolysis if it is done in an inert environment. Like if you do it in a controlled environment where you have nitrogen around, you just produce pyrolysis gas, which are the volatiles inside the organic matter, which comes in the form of gases and tar. Now, the result of converting the biomass is going to be char, which is a solid black solid, like you can see here, which have got great potentials in soil amendment and as solid fuel, because this one can also burn further to produce energy, like this you burn any woody material with less volatiles here. And up here we have the gases or the fuel that we are extracting out from the biomass. And you see here the tar. This is the heavy hydrocarbons that are coming from the biomass. If we go further and condense these gases, we will be able to separate the tar, which is the bio oil, we call it. And it has got characteristics similar to fossil fuel or petroleum product from that we, crude oil we got from the ground. Then there will be a fraction of permanent gases that cannot be condensed. These are, as you can see, containing CO, which is an energy content gas, CH4 and hydrogen. And so from what you see here, this has energy content, which can be burned and also produce energy. And the oil, which is, as I said, is just like a crude oil. If the char is burned further, as I said earlier, you can burn it and get energy, and then the results will be ash, which is just mainly the minerals or the metal content. And this has got uses in catalysis or cement industry. This has got uses in agricultural. This has got uses in energy. So you can see diverse products we have from just simple pyrolyzing of the biomass. This is the typical reactor we use in our lab. And this is what you see here is the condensation of the gas. When you send the gas out into condensers, you'll be able to collect the oil, as you can see in the bottles, 3 bottles here. You have 3 condensation stages to make sure all the heavy hydrocarbon elements are condensed. Out of these 3 condensers is the gas. That is the permanent gas that cannot be condensed and go out, which can be in industry, can be utilized for energy, or in our case here, we just measure it and analyze it by GC, gas chromatography, to know the concentrations of each components. And then we discharge it to a flare system to burn it and release it to atmosphere. This is the oil we collect and analyze. Before this step here, in the reactor here, there is a char pot, which is collecting the char. What you see here is the furnace. That's the furnace that provides the heat. And what you see here is the solid. This is what we call an auger reactor, which has got a screw inside. Once the material falls in, the biomass comes as small particles. We prepare it in a given size, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter size, small. We grind it and dry it, of course, and then send it to the reactor by screw. And then by the end of the exit here, you will see that you'll find that your solid particles, char, will fall down and the gas will go out into this condensation system. This is the system we are running here in our labs. This reactor can process nearly ½ kilo of biomass in 1 hour. So it's a relatively small scale, 500 grams of biomass per hour. And I have to mention the temperature that we usually operate with is around 500 degrees. Now, the concept we are all trying to develop, or not only me, but everybody around the world in this technology, is we want to come to the concept of a biomass refinery, which means we replace the fossil fuel. This is the typical refinery fractionating of the products from any fossil fuels, which can go into car fuels, up to heavy hydrocarbons that for road constructions, and or even chemicals and gases. So you can fractionate your petroleum product in all. This is the same way we can do it for the biomass. By replacing the feed, instead of having crude oil, we will have feedstock of biomass. And this is what we just schematically to show a reactor or a converter to convert all these products into the final products we have in the right side here. We don't want to use, there is always debate between biomass and waste. And now we are targeting waste. We don't want to use any biomass that competing with food. We don't want to use land in expense of food. We don't want to use seeds or any products that can be used as food. So we are focusing on waste. And this is just showing you various kinds of waste that we can utilize. Any organic matter or any organic waste can be utilized for this process. I'll start talking by looking at the first case we are considering here, which is the food waste. As I mentioned earlier, food waste is the highest waste we have here in the UAE in terms of production per person. So it has got potentials to be utilized and diverted from landfill. And these are typical biomass or food waste after we dried it. You can see these are from hospital in Abu Dhabi. And this is from Hotel Rosewood in Abu Dhabi as well. And this is from the same hotel, but from Ramadan time, because we wanted to look at the varieties of the food and whether this is going to be a consistent kind of feedstock. Because if you want to produce energy, you want to start from a consistent feedstock variety to have a consistent product. So these are the all various feedstocks we looked at. And this is the kind of typical product we use. We produce char, which we have great hope that it's going to be very useful for the UAE as a fertilizer. UAE spend millions of dirhams every year for fertilizers. And this is the oil that we produce. As you can see, there is a light fraction, and there is mixed light and heavy, and this is the heavy oil. This is just typical like a crude oil. So as I said, we wanted first to make sure the varieties of food are not so critical to affect our end products. We analyzed, and we always analyze all the feedstocks before we process it in our reactors to produce the fuels and the energy. One of the first thing we consider is the TGA, Thermogravimetric analysis, to see the devolatilization or the mass loss when we heat the material. This is a TGA profile where you put the material under nitrogen and then heat gradually and see the loss in the mass. So what you see from here up to here is mainly the devolatilization or the release of volatiles that we needed for our energy production. And this is important graph to see where would be the end. So this would be relatively the ideal, around the ideal temperature here, 400 to 500, where we can extract all the volatiles by the end of the process. So this will give us indication of what temperature we would work with. Interestingly, in this graph, the 3 or 4 samples, actually we looked at more than 4 samples from various sources, as I said, in Ramadan period, in normal, in hospital, in factories, food waste collected. They all seem to share the same characteristics in terms of ideal temperature for pyrolysis or producing the volatiles. Again, when we went on and looked at proximate analysis, which is looking at the moisture, ash, volatile, fixed carbon inside the material, and we can see that they are all relatively very consistent, very minimum varieties or variations, which confirm to us that regardless of the source, the feedstocks are going to be really consistent and giving us consistent product. Again, we looked at the ultimate analysis, which looks at the nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, sulfur is very minimum. Actually, one of the samples only shown 0.1% of sulfur. And mainly we are interested to have high carbon, because high carbon will guarantee high products of gases and fuels. Also, we also want to have high volatile. These are desirable in our feedstock. We want to have limited ash, because ash will have a diverse adverse effect on the process. Moisture also, we always want to have the moisture below 10% in order to process it in our reactor. So these are characteristics. We always do the same for all feedstocks we use for our pyrolysis or energy generation process. This is the overall yield when we process this material in our reactor. We did pyrolyze it, environment and nitrogen inert environment. This is the mass balance we got. You can see there is almost 50% of the biomass is converted to liquid, condensed. 30% goes into biochar. There is a small fraction. There is a small fraction that goes into gas, and a small fraction, 7.6%, is losses. And these are the losses that happen during the process, because when you are feeding the material inside the reactor, some bio oil may get condensed somewhere here and there, or stuck into the reactor wall and so on. So these are the losses. And we usually have this below 10%, which is normally in most of the reactors carried out for pyrolysis. The most important here is that you can see almost 60% of the liquid is bio oil, and the remaining is aqueous phase, which is like rich in water, which has little value as a fuel. But the focus is on this one. This is the most important one and the useful biofuel, which has got energy content. The gas also has got energy content, and the char also is useful for soil, as I mentioned earlier, or can be used as fuel as well. So this is the typical shape of aqueous phase. As you can see, it is reddish color, light color with majority 70% or more of water. And this is the bio oil, which is heavy, black, dark as crude oil, and has got only 10% water in it, reaction water coming from the reaction, and has high heating value, very high heating value compared to this one. Of course, this one has no value at all. When we actually measure it in bomb calorimeter, has no heating value. This has a reasonable good heating value, as I will mention later on. The gas, as you can see, we analyze the gas using chromatography, GC, gas chromatography. And you can see the CO2 is the major component, but there is CO, which is good for energy. There is CH4, and there is hydrogen. Of course, in pyrolysis, we are targeting bio-oil rather than gas. If we go higher temperature in the process, like we go above 500 degree, like 700 degree, then we are going towards gasification, which prefer formation of gases. But when you limit your temperature around 500 degree, then you are actually maximizing your oil. If you go high temperature, you will have the risk of breaking down these heavy hydrocarbons and converting it to further gases. So that's what will not desired in pyrolysis if you are targeting oil. Heating values, as I mentioned just now, bio-oil has got, this particular bio-oil from food waste has got 28, which is around half of the heating value you normally find in crude oil. Biochar has got 26 megajoule per kilogram, and gas has 12.4. One of the things that we also looked at is to see whether temperature will affect the process. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we ideally want to maximize the bio-oil, and we want to maximize it at the temperature identified here. You can see in this graph here, the blue dots here are the bio-oil yield. And you can notice there is a peak around 550, and then after that, the bio-oil decreases. And at the same time, you can see the black one here is the gas. As I mentioned earlier, increasing the temperature beyond the ideal temperature for pyrolysis, you are risking breaking down the hydrocarbons to gases. That's why you can see above this range, the gas is increasing and the bio-oil is decreasing. So if we are targeting pyrolysis bio-oil, we better fix our temperature not to go beyond this range here. Of course, if you go extremely low, like 350, you are having much lower oil and higher char and less gas. As you increase, the char is decreasing because you are releasing more volatiles. The gas is increasing because you are increasing the temperature, but the bio-oil has got ideal temperature maximum here. For this feedstock is 550, around that range. We also looked at date palm. We looked at the three main parts of the date palm waste. As you know, the UAE produced millions every day and every year, and actually each tree produces around 40 kilograms of waste every year. So you can imagine we have millions of trees in the UAE, and not only in the UAE, in the Gulf, and each one is producing 40 kilograms every year. So it is a huge amount of waste. And currently it's only disposed by landfill or just burning it in unsafe environment to the environment. So we are targeting this one to be used for energy. We looked at the leaves and stem and fruit bunch separately, and then we will see that these parts better to be collected together and processed together as a mixture, because there are no much variations in the characteristics, as I will just show. Here is the mixture after we mix it up, all the dry sources, we dried it and grind it, and then this is how it looks at the end. And this is how we process it in the reactor. Again, we looked at this feedstock to see first we wanted to see the variations in between the various parts of the plant, the waste, and also to identify the best pyrolysis temperature. Again, we can see ideally we are ending our devolatilization or release of volatiles by end of mass loss around this temperature, 400 to 500. The thermogravimetric analysis shows that the three parts of the waste are also very close in terms of behavior or thermal behavior. They all degrade fully around 500. And what you see at the beginning here is the mass loss due to drying, because we, up to 100, we are losing the moisture. And between here and here is the major devolatilization, 200 up to 500. As I said, we also were interested to see if there is any variations between the various parts of the plant. Again, we looked at it. There are some minor variations, especially with leaves. The leaves has got high ash content, 14%, while the fruit bunch has got only 6%. And I'm talking about the leaves because of the ash, because the ash is critically adversely affecting the pyrolysis. Ash contains a lot of minerals. In the process, the minerals will crack the oil and will reduce the bio oil yield. So ideally, we want to have feedstock with low ash content. Date palm has got more ash content than food waste, as if you remember the previous slides. But it has good, reasonably good volatiles, and it has also good level of carbon. Oxygen is not good for our process because it is risking the formation of oxygenated compounds in the bio oil. And these are not desired because they are unstable. And we want to make sure the oil we produce is reasonably stable. The stability of the bio oil is one of the things that research is ongoing to improve the stability, because if you want to use it as a fuel, you want to keep it in storage for some time. You want to make sure it doesn't degrade or doesn't break down. So oxygenated compounds are always not useful, and also they add to acidity of the bio oil. So we always prefer have low oxygen content. But the most important thing here, ash. We have high ash in date palm, which is undesired. This is what you see from date palm. Now, if you remember the earlier slide about food waste, we have very good oil, bio oil. We want only 40% was aqueous and 60% was bio oil. While here in date palm, we have only around 10% is bio oil and the rest is aqueous phase, which is indicative of poor pyrolysis products. Biochar, again, is almost the same as the food waste, 30%. Gas is almost the same. We were having very low losses. We were lucky in that run that I'm showing you here. We have very low losses, but usually losses between less than 10% is acceptable. But the most important in this graph here is the bio oil produced from date palm is very low. And the reason for this one is, as I mentioned earlier, we have high ash content. The ash has diverse effect and break down or catalyze the bio oil and break it down and produce less oil. The bio oil from the date palm is also shown here. It's highly viscous compared to the food waste. This is the char, very fine powder. It has very low density. Heating value almost same as the biochar from the food waste, but noticeably it was having good water retention. We studied the water retention because if we are going to apply this biochar for soil, we want to see how good is it in the soil application. So water retention is one of the characteristics that we want to see high in any biochar if we apply it in soil. Of course, there are other characteristics we need to study before we apply to soil, but this is one of them. Bulk density is good also. Lower bulk density, the more better for soil application. More porosity and good for living organisms that can be helpful in the soil as a fertilizer. The bio oil has got heating value higher than that for food waste, 27. Water content almost the same, but it's also highly acidic. The pH is 3.6, and that's mainly because of the high oxygenated compound in the original feedstock. We want this pH to be a little bit higher in order to ensure that it is not corrosive to processing equipment in applications applied into energy. But date palm is ideal for the UAE because it can be applied, the processing unit can be decentralized, small scale processing units can be distributed around farms in the UAE to produce the char, which is good for the farmer, and produce also some oil that can be utilized for generating some energy within the farms. So it is a proposal that this can be decentralized, this feedstock can be used for decentralized processing units in the UAE. One of the important feedstocks we looked at is Halophyte Salicornia. Salicornia is a plant that grows under high salinity and also ideal, as you can imagine, ideal for the UAE because it can sustain high water salinity and high temperature. The concept here is that we can feed it or irrigate it with seawater, and then we can pyrolyze it. It's an organic matter, and then we can send the oil to energy generation. The CO2 can be pumped into, can be also extracted into plant, of course, can be recycled, and the biochar can be used in the soil. So it's a closed loop concept that can be applied in the UAE. And IGPA Institute in Dubai is developing plantation of Salicornia and studying it extensively to see how it can be potentially used in the UAE, not only for energy, but for as a food source. The seeds of the Salicornia are also, these are the seeds. This is the plant in Makkawi. There is a big plantation area, part of IGPA Institute in the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture in Dubai. The one that you see here is the seeds, because the plant has got seeds and the rest of the plant. And the seeds are highly rich in oil. So it can be used for extracting oil and also can be served as a food. And some people eat it as vegetable. This is when we dried the feedstock you just seen here. When we dried it, we can take away the seeds. This is the seed spike, and the seed can be taken out. And also the seedless plant, that is waste, can be grinded and prepared like this for processing in our reactor. So we have tried both the seed and the seedless plant, which is completely waste. And this one has got other uses, can be used for oil extraction and so on, but also we looked at it for source for biofuels. So we use the Salicornia to get two different feedstocks, the seeds and the seedless plant. And this is how they look after we grind it and dried it. Again, we also went and did the analysis of this material. I don't have the graph for the TGA for the seedless plant, but this is the seeds. Again, the seeds, you can see it here, ideally ending the pyrolysis around 500 degrees. So they all seem to be ideally pyrolyzed at around the 500 degrees. There is no much moisture content, as you can see here. The drying is not too much before 100 degrees, but there is good losses up to 500. We compared the proximate analysis for the seed and the seedless plant. And most important, you can see the seedless plant has got high ash content, 20%. This is the highest. And you can imagine why we have this one. This material in general has high ash content because it is irrigated by saline water, and that is full of minerals. And these minerals end up in the plant. And the seedless plant is particularly the one that has got very high ash. 20% is ash, and the seeds has got lower ash, 13%. Good level of volatiles, very good in the seeds, 75 because it's oily, so rich in oil. Also, we looked at the ultimate iron. Actually, yes, here we looked at the ultimate analysis, and we can see the carbon in the seed is reasonably high compared to the seedless plant, which is good for our process. The oxygen is low also. That means the seeds are better equipped for this process. This is the products distribution. This is the bio oil, has got heating value almost same as the others, 24. But as you can see, the oil, the bio oil, organic, we call it, the organic fraction is quite high. Almost the same yield, but the organic fraction is quite high. Char is almost similar to the others, and the gas as well. Losses are almost the same. But when you compare the seeds, this is the seeds, and this is the seedless plant. You can see the seedless plant has got very low organic. This is the organic fraction. Less than 10% of the liquid is organic or bio oil. Almost similar, sharing similar characteristics to date palm, if you remember. And they are both high in ash content. So that makes sense. Both high in ash content, which adversely affect the bio oil yield. Majority of the product condensed is aqueous. While in the seeds, we are the best one that produce bio oil is the Salicornia seeds, as you can see, compared to the others. And the 3 bottles I'm showing here, because we have 3 condensation stages. This is the first bottle, the second bottle, and the third bottle, just to demonstrate the product that we get. We analyze the char because we know that this material is irrigated by saline water. So we were interested to see what are the minerals or the metals, minerals content. And we can see evidence that there is high sodium and chloride. So it is making sense again, the seedless plant is highest in sodium and chloride because of the salt, while the seeds has got less chlorine and sodium. This is important to analyze the char if we want to apply it in the soil. And actually, since it has no oil, much oil, we looked at its potential for char. We were almost giving up on it as an oil producing feedstock, but how about having it as a char producing? And then we went and looked into the char. One of the parameters we look into the char to make it, to ensure it is good for soil and for actually for also carbon sequestration, because if you put it into the soil, you are capturing the carbon and leaving it in the ground for many years. So it's another way of carbon capture. So one of the assessments we do is we look at the H/C and O/C ratios. And according to the International Bioenergy Institute guidelines, ideally we should have the material falling in this box. Less than 0.7 for H/C, hydrogen to carbon ratio, and less than 0.4 for oxygen to carbon ratio. We can see for other feedstocks, we looked at other materials that produce biochar and seed that produce biochar like rapeseed and safflower and linseed. All these, we compared it to the Salicornia seeds. So we can see the Salicornia seed is not far from the box here, which suggests that it has potential to fall into the category of biochar for soil. While if anything is falling outside, this is the material, original material, the biomass, originally the hydrogen to carbon and oxygen to carbon. It's far away from the box, but when you convert it to biochar, you are carbonizing it and making it more into carbonated material, which has got potentials for soil amendment. So it has good potential. It is falling near to the box here. We also looked at the physical properties, because if we are going to apply it into the soil, we have to see what are physical properties of the char produced from the Salicornia. And interestingly, we can see the seeds is growing in size when we pyrolyze it. The fact is, it is in the reactor, it is getting squeezed by the screw, and the oil that we produce in the beginning of the process goes as agglomerating agent and increase the size of the biochar product. While in the seedless plant, it is getting smaller. If you look at the size distribution of the biochar here, you can see the seedless plant is going to the left. That means it is reduced in size. While for the seeds, it's going to the right. It's increasing in size. So here it is getting larger than the feedstock, and here getting smaller, grinded and getting smaller. As I said, the agglomeration is because of the oily nature of the seeds itself. When it is squeezed, it gets agglomerated. No one has looked at this ever, this kind of research. This is a very novel kind of study. And that's the first of kind in the world, actually, to look at Salicornia in this detailed way. Also, some of the parameters we are interested in is the bulk density, because if we are applying in the soil, we want to see the bulk density, and it is reasonably low, which is advantageous for soil application. One of the things we looked at also, biodiesel is another alternative biofuel we can produce from Salicornia, because it's an oily seed. Actually, the guys in Khalifa University, they were interested in producing biodiesel from the Salicornia, given the fact that it is highly oily. So we wanted to see whether our process is more advantageous than producing it as biodiesel. Biodiesel is a chemical process. So it's not a thermochemical like what we do. In our case, we are heating and producing the bio-oil. In this case, biodiesel is producing by trans-esterification process. It's a chemical process. So we looked at comparing the two, which one is best in terms of energy conversion. And what we can see here, the pyrolysis is way ahead in terms of energy recovery. And energy recovery is defined as energy in the product divided by the renewable energy you put into the process. While the trans-esterification is highly expensive in terms of non-renewable energy, because you need to grind it, you need to do the chemical reactions, you need to, there are lots of energy involved in this one, makes the overall energy recovery low. While in terms of pyrolysis, because the heat by itself can come from the biomass, so you are almost using non-renewables for the whole process. While in terms of energy conversion efficiency, they are almost the same. When I'm saying here, including the meal, because when you do the biodiesel, the remaining of the squeezing of the seeds is the meal. Some people are just using it as feed for animals, but it has got energy content, so you can burn it. So we looked at the scenario where you include it as energy product and not including it, excluding it as energy product. So in both cases, we can see the pyrolysis is well better than the biodiesel production by trans-esterification. In terms of energy conversion, there is great similarity in both. We are able to convert with good potential or good recovery, good efficiency in both cases. They are reasonably comparable, but the most striking result here is the energy recovery factor. Finally, I would like to say a little bit about a novel concept, because so far bioenergy has got the most critical thing is the expenses of the process, or the expense of driving the reaction. So one of the concepts we are trying to develop is having the whole process driven by solar thermal. So heating the reactor by solar energy instead of by fossil fuel or by the biomass itself, because these are the two options to drive the reaction. But if we are successful in driving the reaction by solar energy, then we are actually making a breakthrough on this, and we are competing against fossil fuels. So far, the biofuel is expensive compared to fossil fuel, but by doing this, we are going to make it more attractive and more profitable. And this study we carried out numerically or by computer simulation, but we are looking at experimental validation of this. And the reason of this is, as you can see, we are in the region of the hottest part of the world, the Middle East here. So the solar energy has potentials. I would like to thank my group members. This is a collective work for my members of the group, my collaborators. And also I would like to also mention one final thing. We are collaborating with Dr. Kourosh actually from your university and Dr. David as well in developing algae research. So this is something ongoing. I didn't include it in this slide, but it is ongoing research. We are growing algae in our labs here with the help of the collaboration with Dr. Kourosh and Dr. David to use it as a biomass. So if we are successful in growing algae in saline water, in hot desert climate, then we can grow it in the desert and use it as a feedstock for bio-oil production. So I hope our work will progress with Dr. Kourosh and Dr. David, and I hope to have the chance to show it to you maybe next time in another presentation. So this is my group, and thank you so much, and thanks for my group for contributing. I will conclude here by saying waste to energy is expected to play a major role in achieving the UAE targets. Certainly, we are very optimistic that we are at least not only minimizing the waste, but we are producing very good renewables, especially from the food waste and Salicornia. Experimental data has shown that the biochar also is going to be useful in the UAE. UAE is a desert place, so biochar is going to be useful in fertilizing the soil. The concept of biorefinery is not far to be applied here in the UAE, because some of the facilities for fossil fuel refinery can be converted with minimum cost to process bio-oil and fractionate it to all kinds of products. Solar thermal conversion has also potentials in the UAE. This is something ongoing. Also, I should say also algae, bioenergy from algae is also very highly potential in the region, but we are still in the early stage of that research. A recommendation for further research, we want to upgrade the biofuel. Biofuel you see in my research here is kind of dirty fuel. We need to upgrade it and make it more cleaner, more refine it, and get it more higher energy content. Also, we want to minimize the energy input in the process. Also, we want to look at the varieties of feedstock. We also already addressed the tolerance of varieties of feedstocks. We have confirmed that the food waste, in spite of its varieties, it is suitable to be processed and give you unique and consistent product. Studies are also required for techno-economical assessment. This is something we will look for collaborations, because as long as we don't have any supporting techno-economical evaluation, this cannot be taken into commercial scale. Decentralized bioenergy system, highly recommended for the UAE, especially for date palm. So we can convert the date palm into waste and also run generators in the farms to divert from fossil fuels. I think that's all what I wanted to say, and I hope you enjoyed my talk and gave you a good idea about what we do here in the American University. And thank you, and open for questions and discussion.
Well, thank you very much for a very nice seminar and very informative aspects of biomass to bioenergy conversion here in UAE. Yeah, we have time maybe for a couple of questions. So maybe if you have one, you can just write your name even in Q&A, and then I will call on you to ask it yourself. But while we are waiting, I have one or two questions myself. So as you mentioned, basically date palm seems quite an attractive basically target for the biomass bioenergy initiative that you're taking. How are the efforts in terms of maybe sort of centralizing collection as well as the storage? Are there any efforts basically, or any investment being done to facilitate basically gathering up all the date palm waste for basically the use such as the one that you are having in mind?
Thank you for the question. One of the things that from our part, we are looking at developing the technology and proving the concept. However, there is a great effort required from the government and from the municipalities and to develop waste collection, and especially for food waste, for example. Councils are required to come up with community awareness to understand the useful of having the waste segregated, for example. In regard to date palm, I think there is some effort already ongoing on collecting the date palm waste. I have seen it myself here in the American University. Every season we see the council come and collect the waste in big lorries and so on. So there is ongoing work with date palm, but I think I'm more interested in the food waste because that is thing that we need the community awareness to develop collection and segregation method, especially that the UAE is high in food waste.
And food waste, yes. The other question that I had was with respect to transit certification versus pyrolysis, which, so you mentioned that energy recovery is very high, but much higher than transit certification, but efficiency is about the same. Now, what is the definitions here for recovery versus basically overall efficiency? Can you go over that?
The recovery is actually when you divide the product, energy content in the product, divided by the energy you input into the process. So in the case of transit certification, there is a lot of work to be done on the process. You need to heat up the process. You need to grind and squeeze the oil. That is an energy intensive and has to be done, usually done by electric power, which is fossil fuel energy. While in the pyrolysis, you can heat the reactor using the biomass because you can burn the biomass and produce the energy required to drive the process. That is why when we look at the recovery, let me just put I'm not sure if I can share the slide again, but if you look at the definition of the energy recovery is energy product divided by non-renewable energy input. So that is why we have the pyrolysis better, because we have the chance to drive the whole process by using non-renewable energies. While in the chemical transesterification, there are cost of the chemicals itself is a non-renewable cost. Grinding, and as I said earlier, grinding the feedstock to squeeze the oil and process it further for the chemical reaction is also expensive. That is why you see the huge difference between the two ways. In summary, the pyrolysis can be all driven using renewables, while transesterification, you have to rely on some non-renewable energies to drive the whole process.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In a sense, I think it's really good news in the context of basically people thinking about biofuel. That basically pyrolysis works so well. Any other question from the audience? Well, if not, then I'd like to thank you again for joining us for our seminar series. And as you mentioned, we have been doing collaboration and it's been really a great pleasure. So I hope we can continue that. And I should say that we are now also moving into macroalgae. So perhaps there will be some chance of exploring some macroalgae, which in some sense, it might be actually a little bit easier to handle because you don't have to dewater and things like that as much. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and it was really a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for listening to my presentation and for inviting me. And I look forward to any questions by email. If anyone is interested to come and visit our facilities, of course, after this COVID is over, everybody is welcome to see our labs. And thank you, Kourosh, personally for the collaboration as well. And we hope to take it further.
Thank you. I hope to see you in person